Welcome to our third Women in Leadership webinar series. We are very excited to bring you another amazing workshop today. Today we have a treat because we all have been thrown into this digital space, some reluctantly. We had to make a sudden shift into working in virtual teams. And so today's workshop will be about leading virtual teams. Remote working, we've been doing this for a while now, and we're not sure moving forward how long we'll have to work remotely. But as leaders, it's really helpful to have some best practices in your back pocket as we're navigating this new digital landscape. And we are so excited to have Dr. Jacqueline Stephen here with us. She is Director of the Office of Distant Learning and Instructor of Leadership Studies here at Mercer University, and she is all things knowledgeable, our guru of leading virtual teams. She's going to give us a great presentation today. As you all are listening, if you have questions or comments, at the bottom of your screen there is a Q&A tab. Just type your questions in there and we'll be glad to answer them throughout the presentation. And Dr. Stephen, we are ready for you to begin.
Great. Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar, Leading Virtual Teams. Again, my name is Jacqueline Stephen, and I am a member of the faculty in the Department of Leadership Studies and the Director of the Office of Distance Learning in the College of Professional Advancement at Mercer University. Like many of you, I've been practicing virtual team leadership as the president of an organization which is called the Association Supporting Computer Users in Education. And I've also been teaching online for the past 6 years. I've led many webinars and workshops nationally and internationally on topics related to leadership, instructional design, training and development, and as I'm sure you can imagine, on the very same topic that I'm covering with you today. Everybody's really interested in knowing how do we work virtually and how do we also lead our teams virtually as well. So to be an effective online instructor requires the application of many of the same practices as virtual team leaders will need to engage in their organization. And to be a successful online student requires many of the same practices necessary of virtual team members in a work environment. So as Stephanie mentioned, since March 2020, many have been thrust into the world of virtual working and learning. So virtual work poses new challenges for leaders, especially for those who are not experienced in leading teams from a distance and having to rely solely on the use of technology to lead our teams. It cannot be assumed that the team connection and productivity will automatically continue in a virtual setting. So while virtual teaming does provide many benefits, it can also present greater risks that are related to things such as misalignment and lack of collaboration amongst team members. Research has shown that this misalignment and the lack of collaboration can ultimately and negatively impact team trust and employee engagement if it's not done right. So whether virtual or face-to-face, this is applicable to both environments. So today's webinar will focus on common challenges leaders faced this past year and will continue to face as a result of the sudden and necessary shift to virtual work environments. It will offer strategies team leaders can employ to effectively and efficiently lead their virtual teams. Virtual teamwork is nothing new. Many organizations have long relied on virtual and remote teams to effectively and efficiently achieve their goals. However, what is different today is the sudden shift that organizations had to make overnight to fully virtual work environments. For many, virtual work is no longer considered the alternative or a perk. It is the new reality. So leaders today need to quickly embrace virtual work and make an effort to be the virtual role model for their teams. So I felt it was important to examine and share best practices for leaders to establish productive virtual teams, especially practices that we have learned more about through trial and error since the start of the pandemic. And there are so many stories out there online that, where people have shared their personal journey to working online. And we've learned some lessons and takeaways from those as well. So as such, the primary objectives of this webinar are to help you identify strategies to clarify your team's purpose and roles, determine the steps needed to establish routine and presence, and we'll talk about a lot about routine and presence as a leader, identify strategies to monitor your team's progress and their well-being. So after all, we are operating under different circumstances, and to determine the appropriate uses of technology tools. So there are many tools out there. We don't want to use them just for the sake of saying we're using them. So we need to be very deliberate in our use of technology. So revisiting a team's purpose and team member roles is important to drive team direction. And you need to provide your team members with a sense of belonging as well. So to accomplish this in a virtual setting, leaders need to approach this with intention, clarity, and structure. So it cannot be assumed that all team members who are used to working in a face-to-face environment will now automatically understand and know how to continue to do their work through virtual means. So a leader's role during this shift to virtual work involves ensuring the team knows its purpose, both on an overall team level and a project level, if that's applicable to your work environment. This also includes the principles you work by as a team. Some of those principles may need to be adjusted or adapted for the purpose of remote work. One of the concerns that has emerged as a result of this sudden shift to virtual work is, of course, centered on changes in roles. So shifting to virtual work necessitates an overall reworking of some roles due to changes in the nature of the job. So naturally, adjustments to roles may be necessary, and these may be continuous as well. If your team will continue to work virtually, you will need to regularly make those adjustments. So once
Dr. Stephen,
yes.
I have a question that kind of lends to that. Someone asked, how do you suggest navigating the waters when you work in an organization or have a supervisor that does not embrace virtual work? The pandemic forced some companies' hand in allowing virtual work, but some are reluctant to see its value now that we are past the initial emergency.
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm going to hold off to answering that until the end because I think some of those things may be answered as I go through the presentation. But that's a really good question. There are leaders who have not quite accepted the reality of the virtual work environment. And this is going to differ from organization to organization. So can you just hold on to that question and let's talk about that maybe towards the end?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So once you define or redefine the team's purpose and clarify roles, you then need to prepare yourself to delegate that work to your team. So similar to the face-to-face work environment, you need to give up control as a leader where you can entrust your team members to deliver and to produce in the same way that you would have in a face-to-face environment. So I mentioned earlier, one of my objectives is to not just come in here and give you all of this information, but to also offer you some strategies that I have conducted research on that have been working very effectively at various organizations. So some strategies for purpose and clarity. Well, a good starting point is to engage with your team and individual team members in a process of identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So this is commonly referred to as a SWOT analysis, and you may have already engaged in something similar to this, but a quick search online will yield many free templates that you would use for this activity. So it's called a SWOT analysis. If you type it into Google, you'll get all sorts of templates that you can use, and it's easy to create your own in Microsoft Office. So this could be a two-step activity. Excuse me?
No, no question.
Okay, so this could be a two-step activity. The first step is to ask each member to complete a personal SWOT analysis. So the overall goal is to learn more about each member of your team as individuals. Not that you already don't know anything about them. You may have worked with them in a face-to-face environment, but you are now developing a virtual team. You are taking that face-to-face team and developing them as a virtual team. So you need to learn more about their individual strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as they relate to their new role or their new format of doing their work. Not every team member will find it easy to transition to a virtual work environment. So the more that you and they themselves know about their strengths and weaknesses, the more likely you can both work together to address specific needs. The second step is for you to engage your team in a SWOT centered on the team itself. So not only are you working to find out more about the individuals, but as a team, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats? One team member's weakness may be another team member's strength. So this activity lends itself well to helping the team determine what they collectively need in order to achieve productivity, whether it's professional development or training or other resources. You can discover more about that as a team through an activity such as this one. Another strategy is to determine if any of the existing teamwork processes have changed due to the shift. Work with your team to map these processes out. The team can then avoid duplicated efforts. You know, everybody needs to know who's doing what. Just because we shifted to online, it doesn't mean that you automatically pick up new roles or new tasks. Those need to be identified and then delegated accordingly. Then it's really recommended that you periodically engage with your team in after-action reviews. So after-action reviews enable you to evaluate how things are going and identify process adjustments and any gaps in training that need to be addressed that are crucial to your team's productivity. Okay, so I mentioned routine earlier. So routine has become very important, especially because we are working virtually and we have some degree of freedom with our routine. So one theme that continues to emerge in the recent literature since March on working remotely is routine. So it is really important to keep in mind that prior to the pandemic, your team members had a routine. They may have dropped off their kids at a school, picked up a coffee on the way, dropped off their kids at daycare. They may have worked from 8 to 5 p.m. and took their lunch at a certain hour during the day. Whatever they did and however they did it, they had a routine that was very familiar to them. And some people thrive from having a routine. So naturally, people who are used to a routine may find it very difficult to establish a routine on their own without your help as their leader. And so they will look to you to help them envision a similar routine in their new remote work environment. So when some or all of the team members are working separately, it's just too easy to get disconnected from those normal, the normal rhythms of a work life, especially the work day. So be very intentional about informal and formal virtual gatherings and meetings. Informal gatherings are invaluable to engagement and productivity, but they may not happen by themselves when you work virtually. So encourage people to be creative about how they meet and how they use the technology available to you to meet. Schedule recurrent activities and try to maintain the same days and times for specific meetings each week. Another recommendation, that I've seen in the literature is to make these recurrent in virtual space and to prioritize them as they are key to really making your team deliver on its purpose. Most importantly, out of routine, I think for you as a leader is to embrace change because your team will also need to embrace change, and they will look for you to lead by example. They're looking for your leadership and how you have approached change and how you adjusted to change. So some strategies that I pulled out of various best practices that we have learned more about since March on routine include a shared schedule and new traditions. So these are just a couple of strategies for helping your team maintain a healthy routine. Schedule regular meetings, ideally the same day and same time each week. This also means establishing and sharing a meeting agenda, not just sharing a link to a Zoom meeting, but what is the agenda and who's involved in the agenda. So it's really important to share that in advance with your team. Have very clear agreements with your team on communication protocols, and also starting and finishing meetings on time, just like you would in a face-to-face environment. It is likely that your team members are really missing some of the traditions of working in the office. I know I certainly miss some traditions of just being in my office and being around other people. So you want to consider creating some new traditions, and it's important that you get input from your team on what types of traditions they'd like to explore. And you can do that through a brief survey with your team, or ask them for some ideas that they can share with you and get the team to agree. I've seen some great examples lately of how this is being done. One of my personal favorites has been, I guess because I like coffee and I like tea, but it has been a weekly team coffee / tea virtual brainstorming meetup at 10 a.m. once a week, and everybody decides on which day of the week. So I really like that. It's kind of a de-stressor. We don't talk work. We just talk about things that are going on in our lives and how we're handling all of those things that are ultimately related to how we perform in our work environment too. So you do not have to lead all of these meetings or all of these informal gatherings. It's important to delegate to your team members. Many video conferencing services offer whiteboard functions that lend themselves really nicely to virtual brainstorming activities. I recently engaged in a brainstorming activity where the virtual board was used and we all contributed to it, and we designed what a 2020 t-shirt would look like. And we just had great fun with it, and it was a nice way to break the ice as well. You could also ask your team members to brainstorm some ideas about a product or a service, and they can invite you to a future virtual meeting to present and discuss their ideas. You don't always have to lead every meeting. You can delegate those meetings. This also helps them, your team members, to gain some additional skills in the process, skills related to virtual collaboration, presentation skills, and of course, the use of technology. I recently asked a few of my colleagues who are in leadership positions about their one major concern about leading their virtual teams. And they all agreed that progress is a constant worry. And I would say this one is probably linked to the question that came in earlier about why many leaders may be hesitant to continue or to remain or even begin to remotely manage their employees. How will they know that the work is getting done and that their employees are doing what they're supposed to be doing? I think it's important to spend time with your team to help them prioritize existing and new tasks. And this requires a great deal of structure. So as you shift from face-to-face to virtual work, it's important to reassess what tasks are no longer relevant and what tasks have suddenly become critical or even missing. And this was something that I quickly realized with the type of work that I do. I had to kind of put some things on the back burner that were no longer as important as they had been when we were face-to-face or when I was teaching a face-to-face class. And I had to prioritize some new things that emerged as a result of the pandemic and just the change in the external and internal environments. Know who can support you on what and when. So it is really important that you know your team members really well. And that's why I really like the use of the SWOT analysis. So this will help you keep your team members flexible as a resource to you and to other team members, and to also ultimately maintain productivity. So this is nothing new, but it is something that is made difficult through the physical distance that many of us may not be used to. So again, this is where the results of something like a SWOT analysis will be very useful to individuals and to the team as a whole as well. So some strategies for monitoring progress. After you prioritize your team's tasks, you need to keep one integrated overview of all tasks the team is working on. What we're seeing right now, or what we saw at the beginning of summer, was just everybody was trying to do everything at once, and emails were flying around with Word documents. There was no versioning of the Word document, so you didn't know if you were looking at the most recent document. And everybody was wondering, how will I know who's doing what and what progress they've made, and will they meet the deadline? So progress is ultimately going to be important all the time, regardless of the format of your work environment. So the important thing about having one integrated document is to make sure that everybody is looking at the same thing at all times. So after you prioritize individual and team tasks, engage with your team in constructing SMART goals to accomplish their assigned tasks. Setting goals is not an easy activity for everybody, and some people can do it very effectively and some cannot. Some people can write amazing goals and never really have a plan together on how to achieve those goals. So SMART stands for, it's an acronym, it stands for specific. So the goals need to be specific. They need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, they need to be relevant, and they need to be time-based. So again, I will point you to Google because an online search on a SMART worksheet or a template will yield many existing templates that you could use for free. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I use SMART goals to help my online students break down assignments or projects, focus their efforts, and most importantly, manage their time, because deadlines are really important. Whether you're a student or an employee, deadlines are very important. So when I asked my colleagues who had to shift to virtual work to identify one of their greatest challenges so far, time management emerged as their primary concern, even their own time management, how they're managing their own time. And this is completely understandable, especially for those who were used to a traditional work schedule. You worked in the office, and when you left the office, you went home and work stayed in the office. Well, that has changed. Now work is part of our home as well. Another strategy that I strongly recommend, because there are so many great results that are being reported out there from organizations, is to celebrate achievements. Your team is having to overcome a lot of work-related and personal challenges daily. So let's not forget to celebrate productivity and progress when it does happen, and to highlight those, and to maybe share some best practices amongst team members on how they are achieving their goals. Okay, well, a webinar on virtual teams cannot dismiss technology. So we have to talk about technology, and I'm not recommending any specific technology. It comes down to whatever your organization provides, or whatever is out there that is available to you. But virtual teams truly need to explore and incorporate technology in their ways of working to succeed. So we are so reliant on technology today, and it's really important that we all leverage its use to help us be more productive. Numerous technologies let you virtually collaborate, co-create, and brainstorm on a shared canvas. So I gave you an example earlier. Do not make meetings just about talking. Turn meetings into collaborative events and creation hubs, because technology today does make this a simple thing to do. As for selecting technology, my recommendation is to find the best fit for your team, or even better, engage your team in establishing and maybe presenting on a list of available technology tools and selecting which tools to use for specific activities. Your team members are more likely to be excited about the use of various technology tools if they are shown how the tool will help them to be productive and to get their work done and ultimately to achieve their SMART goals. Help your team to overcome initial frustrations or fears with some of the technology. Again, this is where you will need to be leading by example. Share your own fears or frustrations and work together to overcome them as a team. So some strategies for technology: schedule regular professional development opportunities. Just like you are today attending this webinar, there are so many webinars out there and so many self-learning opportunities that your employees can engage in. And as a leader, you can be out there searching for some of these opportunities, or even better, assign that task to your team members. Let them know that you're looking for specific professional development, a webinar or a course that the entire team can enroll in or engage with, and to feed that back to the team. Through the SWOT analysis, you can determine some training gaps. So some team members may be experts at something and maybe they can train other team members virtually. Create some opportunities for virtual mentorship, especially if your team has been virtual and you have a new member joining your team. So it's going to be really difficult to onboard somebody new coming in a virtual work environment without some form of mentorship from the team or the leader of the team. Again, investigate short courses or certificate opportunities that are currently delivered virtually. Many of these are free. So this is a great way to engage in some professional development and growth for your team. Professional development doesn't always have to be synchronous. Synchronous refers to live virtual training occurring on a specific day or time. For example, this webinar is synchronous because it's occurring right now and everybody's joined live. However, once it's recorded and the link is shared out, then it becomes asynchronous. It means that anybody can access it at any time on any given day. So professional development can also be asynchronous, and it can be accessed at a time that is convenient for team members. Consider creating a secure online space to share how-to videos, printable instructions, and any other materials that could be helpful to your team. So have a one-stop shop for your team members to access various resources. And you also want to ask your team members to contribute to that space as well. You as a leader do not have to do all of this. Your team members may have access to various resources that they would be willing to share with their colleagues as well. So the next topic is centered on visibility and presence. So your visibility and presence in a virtual work environment, just as it is in a face-to-face environment, is critical to your team's success. In all of the best practices on virtual leadership that I've read since March, there was one theme that really stood out. And that is to stay open-minded to the shift in each team member's needs, and even more importantly, their diverse needs. Listen and do what you can to accommodate your individual team members. Some will have children in school, some will not have children in school, some will have children sitting next to them at home doing the work, others will not. So everybody's unique, everybody will have unique and diverse needs. This really stood out for me, this finding and this recommendation as a best practice, because this is not something that I had seen in the literature prior to this pandemic. So we cannot forget that many people today who are working remotely had never intended to work remotely, and they are having to navigate a new reality just like everybody else around the world. So your past high performers may struggle to adapt to a virtual work environment, while some of your other team members may be performing better than ever before. So everybody will approach this in a different way. Help those who struggle, but also recognize those who are thriving. Many will be successful. So again, a personal SWOT analysis can help to reveal some of these barriers that your team members are having to face or overcome, or maybe looking for ideas on how to overcome.
You have
yes.
to that too. And maybe you want to think about it. I'll read the question at the end. It says, okay. What can an employee do to manage up when your employer isn't a great manager in person and it's worse in a virtual setting?
Wow. Okay. So now we're talking about a whole other webinar that is that needs to emerge from this. But let's hold on to that question until the end, because that's a valid question that I'd like to talk about. I don't have all the answers to it, but I think it's a valid question that I'd like to address.
Yeah, I just jumped down to the question to plant the seed.
Yep, just hold that in there. So that's perfect. I know what everybody's thinking based on the questions they're asking. So I hope I can offer some advice, but maybe not solutions, but some advice. Most importantly, I think as a leader is, your presence has more to do with you and your ability to show your team that you are there and that you're available to them and for them and to help them. So I think that's the nature of your presence. You do not have to be logged in, and they don't have to be logged in, and you have to watch them on Zoom or some other, on WebEx. I think the important thing is that they know that you're there, and your presence could be felt in just regular communication as well. Okay, so some strategies for visibility and presence. So how do you make yourself visible and present? Well, provide opportunities for your team members to initiate meetings with you. You should not put it on yourself to be the only one who can initiate meetings. Have some open kind of, with professors, we have office hours, but even as a leader or as a manager, I think having open office hours is really critical, especially when you're in the online work environment. So have some office hours available for team members to initiate a meeting with you. Share your schedule with your team and let them know when you're available and how they go about requesting to meet with you during these hours. Turn the video option on during meetings. Research does show that this makes people feel more connected during meetings. It may not work for every meeting, but it's a good start. Do not schedule meetings just for task progress. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about today about meeting burnouts and Zoom burnouts. And, if things can be accomplished asynchronously, which means through email or maybe a shared virtual document online, rather than having to have meetings about everything, then certainly do that. Invite each team member to construct the agenda for the meetings and allow them to lead parts of the meeting. Whether they want to or not, you can assign them different segments of the meeting so that they are playing a role and the meeting is not just one way, but it's truly collaborative in nature, and it's more centered on their active involvement and engagement in a meeting rather than being passive attendees at a meeting. One valuable lesson that I learned about virtual leadership is there is no such thing as communicating too much. And when I say communicating too much, it doesn't mean spamming everybody with emails. In times of uncertainty, we need to communicate more and not less. However, make sure your communication is strategic and that it is related to the team's purpose. What you don't want to do is just forward every email along that comes to you, to your team members, without an introduction as to why you're forwarding that email. Why do they need to pay attention to it? Does every team member need to see that email, or maybe one or two team members? So be very selective in what you're sharing and forwarding, because after a while, people start to struggle with what's important and what's just FYI, and what do they need to act on and what can they ignore. So it's important to coordinate and structure your communication, delegate who on your team delivers what messages, and when those messages are delivered. So for example, if your team did not work on a Saturday or Sunday, I'd hold off. You can construct your messages on Saturday and Sunday if you choose to work on a Saturday or Sunday, but many email applications today enable you to set a delivery time, a future delivery time for your email. So when I'm working on the weekend, I recognize that some of my colleagues are not working on the weekends. I just chose to work on the weekend because I had some time. So then I set up my email, the email that I drafted to my colleagues, I set that up to be delivered on Monday at 10 a.m. or at 9 a.m. That way I've gotten my task done. I completed my email, but I don't want them to receive it until their work day and at the time that they would come in and can pay attention to it. Otherwise, it puts a lot of unnecessary stress on your employees to have to act on an email because they received it. So emails can get very boring, as we learned. Sending emails to your team is not your only option. Figure out how you can use different formats and platforms to communicate as to staying relevant and dynamic. Examples include videos, short video clips, maintaining a blog, or even a weekly newsletter, an electronic newsletter where you just kind of capture all the highlights into one newsletter. You can ask for your team's input into the newsletter, and that could be shared once a week, rather than having emails go out constantly to everybody. Some recommended strategies for communication include the implementation of a centralized virtual workspace for your team. This can really help to alleviate some of the issues related to all these emails that are just flying around, all these different calendars, and all of these text messages and things that are being shared across the web with the team members. Establish guidelines. So when I say guidelines, I'm referring to rules of responsiveness. How long should it take somebody to respond? What's acceptable and what's not for response time. Many organizations have 24 hours. Some organizations have 48 hours. If your staff does not work on the weekend, then have some kind of a guideline that if an email is received on Friday after a certain hour, that you may not hear back from them until a Monday. So establish other guidelines related to the time and duration of synchronous meetings. How long should these meetings take? This includes the times that messages are sent out as well. So as I mentioned previously, I'm very sensitive to what time I send emails out. Just because I want to work at 11 p.m., I don't want to panic the recipient of my email by sending them an email at midnight when it's something that can wait until the next day. So these are very important. And if you haven't already done this in your organization and you have been working remotely, I strongly recommend that you do this with your team. As a leader, even in the virtual environment, it's important that you build trust and you empower your team members to take action and initiative. Embrace failure and learn from it. Your team will again follow your lead in how you react to virtual work, how you react to technical issues, and how productive you are as a leader will also be an example to your team as well. So be very open about your own struggles. There's nothing wrong with sharing your own personal struggles, shifting to a virtual work environment and sharing how you overcame those struggles as well. Trust your team to do the work, just as you would trust them in a face-to-face environment. Take advantage, if it's possible, of the benefit that virtual work does offer. Some of those benefits include, work schedules, adjusting work schedules. For example, does the workday have to remain 8 to 5? Now that you're all working virtually, do you have to stick to those exact work hours, or can an employee carve out their 40 hours a week in a different way? Can they complete their 40-hour work week through a varied schedule format? Maybe some employees can be more innovative outside of traditional work hours. And I know that's a scary thought to traditional face-to-face leadership, but I know for me, one of the things that I do at Mercer University is I design and develop online instruction. And just like with this webinar, when I put this webinar together, this was something I put together in the middle of the night. Some people work really well late at night when there are no hindrances or distractions, and others work different. They do their best work at 8 a.m. or only from 8 to 5. So find out what works for your team and if this flexibility is a possibility. So to empower your virtual team members, involve them in leadership roles, maybe even as project leads, or rotate different team members to lead weekly team meetings and to develop the agendas. Again, they're going to be gaining new skills by you engaging them. So you're going to address many key aspects of professional development for your employees by engaging them and involving them in taking on some shared leadership. Assign responsibility for special projects, such as identifying and sharing best practices. Give them some research activities to do, things that they can go out there and feed back to the team on how to be more productive, how to be more effective, and how to communicate more efficiently and effectively. Get team members to coach others in their areas of expertise. So the reason you have a team put together is everybody has something to offer. So find out what that is and get them to coach others. You can also assign team members as mentors to help out new and incoming team members. We're starting to see that now, where many employers have opened up all of these job opportunities for remote work, and all of these new employees still need to undergo onboarding. So how do you do that in the virtual environment? Another activity that I've seen work really well has been running these virtual team building exercises. Just because we're all working from home, it doesn't mean that we have to stop team building. There's so many creative activities out there that you can do to continue to develop and engage your team in some team building activities. Okay, so as I mentioned before, well-being is important, and it's become very important in virtual leadership, especially since March. So the well-being of your team members is critical to their engagement. If you want them to be more engaged, you also need to know how they are doing and what are things that are going on with them and their overall well-being. So this, of course, is important regardless of whether or not your team is virtual or physical. So when you work remotely, many aspects of your life can quickly blend together. They kind of become a blur. So encourage your team members to set boundaries and conditions for their work. And this is something that I've had to learn to do myself. You want to encourage healthy routines. Again, this can be accomplished through some form of virtual professional development, or even finding out how team members, having them share practices that are working for them. How are they getting along, and how are they establishing their routine? And of course, lead by example. Agree with your team on a set of ground rules and build the routines that will contribute to your team's overall wellness. So some strategies for the well-being of you as the leader and your team. Engage in virtual team building activities. Again, I'm going to point you to online resources. There are so many resources out there. There are books that have been written just about virtual team building and team building. So there are definitely resources out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are so many tried and true virtual team building activities designed to support a variety of topics related to well-being. Another strategy is to host weekly lunch and learns. So a lunch and learn is very popular in higher education, but a lunch and learn is an informal format of professional development. It is typically scheduled during lunch hour, but in this format, it would be virtual, of course. And topics can focus on financial wellness, stress management. Maybe everybody on your team or the majority of your team members have kids in school. So another related topic could be about homeschooling. I've even seen virtual yoga and meditation hour. So there are a lot of great activities out there, and you want to be creative in how you do these lunch and learns. They should be informational, and they should be engaging, and they should be fun ultimately. So in summary, as a virtual team leader, you need to consider the following actions. You want to clarify the team's purpose and team member roles. You may think that they know these, which they do, probably in a face-to-face environment, but let's talk about them again now that we're virtual. Build a team with rhythm. Routine is very important. I've learned this lesson myself, and I'm now in a routine, like many other people, just out of lessons learned, personal lessons that I've learned. Guide your team members in prioritizing their work tasks. Look at what's important first, what is due first, what is achievable first. Encourage collaboration amongst your team members. They need to know that they're not out there just kind of working in silos on their own. You want to engage them in activities where they collaborate. Very important to me is you need to establish your presence. They need to know that you are there virtually. And there are so many ways to do that, as I mentioned in this webinar. Build trust. Lead by example, by being a role model, and demonstrating the behaviors, the attitudes, and the actions that you desire of your virtual team members. And finally, communicate effectively and, of course, regularly. And we talked about communication. You know, you don't want to spam everybody, so be very creative in how you do that on a regular basis. So I do have some resources that I've put up here for you, some additional reading that you may be interested in. And I purposely selected a couple that just emerged that are probably more timely to the needs of those organizations that are currently or recently shifted or will be shifting to fully online. So these are some additional resources that I'd like to highlight for you in case you'd like to explore this topic further. And this is my contact information if you'd like to contact me with any further questions. Again, I'm with Mercer University, and I teach in the Human Resource and Development program at Mercer and Leadership Studies. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
We do have two. Let's see if this is the first one. You touched on it a little bit.
Can I stop? Can I stop? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can at least. Okay, there we go.
Okay. It says, how do you suggest navigating the waters when you work in an organization or have a supervisor that does not embrace virtual work? Pandemic has forced some companies' hand in allowing virtual work, but some are reluctant to see its value now that we are past the initial emergency.
Right. Well, I mean, when I first heard that question, I was also thinking about it as I presented, because it is a valid question, and it's a question that higher education has long struggled with, because when we shifted to online learning, these were the same questions. There was a lot of doubt about online learning. There still is doubt out there. And I think that this is what's happening now today in organizations is with this shift, they're all asking, you know, some are asking, can we do this? Will it be done? So my recommendation is the leadership of that organization needs to engage in an activity where they re-examine their mission. What is the overall mission of their organization? What is their vision? Where do they see themselves? And if they only see themselves as a face-to-face brick and mortar wall organization, then that's how they will remain. But if their vision is to grow and to expand, you know, certainly they should not be dismissing the benefits gained through virtual work environments. So it will really come down to each organization. I mean, I can't advise a specific organization and say, okay, now you need to be virtual. But I think these are important discussions for any organization to engage in today, because this is the reality. And just a quick search this morning, I went on LinkedIn this morning, and I always just kind of look for jobs, where are the latest jobs at? Not for me, but what does the market look like for jobs today? And nearly every job that was popping up within the past 30 days that has been posted, a vacancy that has been posted, right next to it, it's highlighted in LinkedIn, remote work, remote work, remote work. So there is a shift in those traditional organizations expanding into remote work. So that's the best answer I can give. I don't have a solution.
Okay. Another question. This is more context for the second question, so it's a little bit longer.
Yep.
Because if a manager doesn't know if work is being completed, this means the manager is not adequate at managing. It is almost guaranteed that the employee was underperforming pre-COVID. Office small talk and the togetherness of in-person offices covers up a lot of unproductive time for some employees. I appreciate the focus of this webinar on leaders self-reflecting and stepping up to be good managers. What can an employee do to manage up when your employer isn't a great manager in person and it's worse in a virtual setting?
Well, I mean, I would hope that the organization you work at has some kind of a 360 or engages in some kind of an evaluation process through human resources, because I think it's unfair to assume that all leaders will be able to suddenly become these star virtual leaders. They also need to be developed professionally. So my hope is that organizations are engaging all of their employees in some form of a survey to understand more about how the nature of their work and also their leadership and the management of their work, how that has changed, and that needs to be addressed. So I think what's important here is we can't assume that whatever happened face-to-face is going to happen online. And the person who asked the question, that's a great question, because similar to an online or in higher education, I often get students saying, I didn't do well because it's an online course. Well, a lot of times the student didn't do well in a face-to-face course either. So maybe it's not the format of the course, but it could be that the student is lacking in some necessary prerequisite skills that would lead them to success. So that's the best way that I can describe it. But I would hope that organizations out there are surveying their employees and they are evaluating their employees and the leaders of these teams as well, and offering professional development. So again, I think, to be fair, I think not just developing team members, but I think leadership today needs to be developed as well.
Yeah. Another question before I introduce Jeff is, how do you suggest creating an organizational SWOT?
An organizational
SWOT analysis.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, organizations should already be doing this anyway. So at the top of your organization, I mean, for the health of the organization, there is a if you go to the Mind Tools website, and there's some other websites out there that have templates on how you actually conduct an organizational level SWOT analysis. And this is a healthy activity that every organization should engage in now, probably more regularly than ever. I know in the past, some organizations, it's something that they do as part of their strategic planning annually, for example, or maybe every 2 or 3 years. But I think the nature of today, with all of these changes, I think it's healthy to revisit that and to conduct those organizational SWOT analyses regularly, more than ever.